In a move that has sent shockwaves through the monarchy, King Charles has officially signed a confidential royal order that strips Queen Camilla of all decision-making power effective immediately. The implications are staggering. No prior warning, no public announcement, just a sealed document and a stunned palace. Why now? What was the final straw? And how did the woman once at the center of Charles's trust lose everything so fast? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The day began like any other behind palace walls, yet by midday, whispers turned into roars. A courier arrived at Clarence's house with a sealed packet bearing the king's insignia, an order so tightly held that not even Camilla's closest aides were briefed. What emerged from that envelope was an unprecedented declaration. Queen Camilla was to be relieved of all powers related to royal governance, ceremonial participation, and charitable oversight. It was not merely symbolic. It was structural. The very framework of royal operations had shifted overnight. By late afternoon, palace corridors were filled with frantic movement. Security personnel were quietly instructed to restrict Camilla's access to key administrative chambers, and several of her advisors were immediately removed from the royal calendar system. Aides who once reported directly to her found themselves redirected to the king's newly formed internal council. Phones were disconnected, documents rerouted. Camilla was, for all intents and purposes, exiled within her own title. The queen consort in name but no longer in influence. Insiders described the decision as shockingly unilateral. Charles had consulted neither senior courtiers nor Camilla herself. His legal team, however, had been preparing the mechanism for weeks. The final blow wasn't spontaneous, it was calculated. The secrecy of the move revealed how deeply the king had come to distrust his wife's recent conduct. He had instructed his top legal counsel to prepare a redaction clause in all forward-facing royal engagements, ensuring Camilla's name would quietly vanish from policy drafts, event decisions, and public-facing campaigns. Within hours, royal insiders scrambled to control the narrative, but even they were blindsided. Many learned about the signed order only after Camilla's private car was rerouted from its usual destination to a secluded wing of the palace. Journalists sniffed around the story, but statements were deliberately vague. Internal realignments, one press officer offered. But beneath that sterile phrase was a monarchy that had just experienced a violent internal shift, one that may have permanently fractured its most private alliance. To the public, Camilla remains queen consort. But to those inside the system, her power has collapsed in real time. No more decisions, no more directives, and no more illusions. The woman who once held the king's ear now stands silenced by the stroke of his pen. It is a chapter few ever imagined would be written, but now, the ink has dried, and the ramifications are unfolding with ruthless precision. But to understand how Camilla went from power to powerless, we must unravel the explosive confrontation that triggered it all. Behind the polished facade of palace life, a devastating argument erupted at Balmoral, one that would alter the course of royal history. Eyewitnesses claim the queen consort stormed into the drawing room, hurling accusations at Charles in a moment of fury. What was said that night was never meant to leave those walls, but now, the chilling details are spilling into daylight. It began with whispers, as most palace scandals do. A quiet unease during the morning walk, sidelong glances exchanged over breakfast, and the subtle absence of Camilla from a scheduled luncheon with royal staff. But by twilight, the calm had shattered. The queen consort was said to be pacing outside Charles's private quarters, fuming over recent decisions that, to her, represented betrayal. The king had made several key staffing changes, moves Camilla saw not only as disrespectful but deeply strategic. She believed he was methodically erasing her influence from the palace machine. And when she finally confronted him, the tension detonated with volcanic force. Sources close to the family recount Camilla's accusations as blistering. She reportedly accused Charles of conspiring with their son William to isolate her from the monarchy's inner workings. She challenged his loyalty, questioned his resolve, and warned him that removing her from decision-making would fracture the crown. Charles, shaken but unyielding, fired back with a cold precision. He reminded her that her title was honorary, not authoritative, and that she had strayed dangerously far from her lane. It was a verbal duel that exposed every crack in their public unity. The heart of the argument, however, was more than just about titles. It was about trust. Camilla had long asserted herself in matters of succession planning and internal appointments, often pushing for allies to rise within the palace structure. Charles had tolerated this influence for years, perhaps even welcomed it. But something had changed. Behind closed doors, he had begun to see her moves not as supportive, but self-serving. That night at Balmoral, he finally said it aloud. "You've been undermining the traditions that define us," he reportedly told her, "and I won't let it continue." The room's energy turned volatile. A crystal glass was hurled across the floor, shattering on the ancient stone fireplace, whether in rage or desperation remains unclear. Staff were summoned as voices escalated and footsteps pounded through the corridor. Doors slammed. Aides stood frozen. Never before had the king and queen been witnessed so exposed, so raw, so utterly at war with one another. And it didn't end there. As Camilla was escorted away, Charles remained seated, unmoved, eyes fixed on the fire as if already imagining the consequences of what had just transpired. Hours later, his closest advisors were summoned. No press releases. No explanations. Just a single instruction: begin drafting contingency protocols. It was no longer a matter of if, but when. Yet this wasn't just about a single argument, it was the culmination of years of buried resentment and secret manipulation. For years, King Charles chose diplomacy over confrontation, ignoring whispers about Camilla's growing influence behind the scenes. But in recent months, something shifted. Private documents, leaked emails, and staff testimonies forced him to face a truth he had long buried. Camilla was not just supporting the crown, she was steering it. It didn't happen all at once. It never does in royal circles. The erosion of trust unfolded quietly, slowly, until it was impossible to ignore. Charles, once fiercely loyal to Camilla even in the face of public backlash, began to see the invisible lines she had drawn through the palace walls, lines that separated her power from his. One of the first red flags emerged when a scheduled appointment for a senior royal aide was suddenly cancelled without Charles's approval. At first, it was brushed off as a clerical miscommunication. But then it happened again, and again. When Charles investigated, he discovered Camilla had been privately overruling key decisions, vetoing appointments, and even bypassing protocols to place her own allies in sensitive roles. The betrayal deepened with the discovery of private messages. A cache of emails buried in encrypted threads and forwarded through back channels linked Camilla to a network of controversial advisors, individuals Charles had explicitly distanced the monarchy from. These weren't friendly consultations. They were strategic correspondences, outlining press tactics, discussing potential leaks, and dissecting the optics of royal engagements. It was Camilla's parallel monarchy, a quiet structure working beneath the surface of Charles's own rule. Most damning was the orchestration of press briefings. Anonymous quotes praising Camilla's modern leadership and stabilizing influence began appearing across select media outlets, often conveniently timed to distract from Charles's initiatives. Royal press staff traced the briefings to a source uncomfortably close to Camilla's communications team. One insider described it as a deliberate campaign to reshape the royal narrative from the inside out. What once appeared as harmless PR now reeked of tactical manipulation. And the interference didn't stop there. Camilla's influence began spilling into areas sacred to the next generation. Prince William and Princess Catherine's initiatives, particularly their work on mental health and early childhood development, faced unexpected delays and bureaucratic friction. Project resources were quietly redirected, schedules altered, and appearances restructured. At first, William believed it to be coincidence. But after an internal audit revealed consistent interference, the suspicion turned to certainty. Camilla, whether directly or through loyal intermediaries, was subtly undermining their visibility. Then came the final, unforgivable revelation: a secret recording. Captured by a palace staffer during what was presumed to be a private moment, Camilla was heard mocking Charles's long-standing environmental agenda. Her tone, reportedly dripping with sarcasm, dismissed his climate efforts as tiresome theatrics. The recording found its way to Charles's private office. He listened to it alone. Twice. Shaken. But no longer in denial, Charles turned to his inner circle. Quietly, methodically, they began building a dossier documenting every unauthorized move, every breach of trust, every manipulated narrative. The king no longer sought confrontation. He sought control. The palace, once a symbol of unity, had become a battleground of influence, and Charles knew he could no longer afford to look away. But even more chilling than her quiet manipulation was who helped her and why. Camilla was never acting alone. Deep inside the corridors of influence, a web of powerful allies operated to protect her status. From aristocratic fixers to press insiders and old guard courtiers, Camilla's inner circle waged a silent campaign to keep her untouchable until someone inside turned on them all. While the palace appeared serene to the public eye, behind the gates, clandestine meetings were taking place with individuals Charles had once banished from the royal advisory system. These weren't coincidental encounters. They were quiet strategy sessions held at obscure locations, away from royal oversight, with former advisors who had long been considered a liability to the crown. Camilla, it turned out, had been reviving old alliances, drawing upon a network of operatives who knew the ins and outs of the royal machine men and women, who knew how to twist levers of influence without ever being seen pulling them. Among her most useful weapons were her media contacts, editors who owed her favors, journalists who remembered who had whispered exclusives in their ears during the family's darkest moments. Damaging headlines about Camilla mysteriously disappeared before going to print. Stories critical of her were softened, reshaped, or killed entirely. Instead, glowing profiles emerged, framing her as the quiet architect of royal resilience. It wasn't luck. It was orchestration. And it gave her a shield few dared pierce. But the deeper the palace looked, the darker the trail became. A discreet audit of household finances revealed inconsistencies. Funds earmarked for charitable initiatives were being redirected. Certain vendors were receiving double payments. Private expenditures were masked under ceremonial costs. When questioned, Camilla's office provided vague answers, but they couldn't disguise the trail forever. Something was amiss, and Charles's investigators knew it. The discrepancies weren't just financial, they were strategic. It was a form of royal laundering, creating favors and buying silence. The breakthrough came when a former aide, long dismissed and quietly exiled from royal life, resurfaced with a dossier of names individuals comprising what was secretly referred to as the Camilla Circle. Their roles ranged from logistics to press, from legal contacts to long-retired nobility. Some were still active in royal circles, others had re-emerged in advisory shadows. This aide had grown disillusioned, claiming that what began as loyalty had turned into something unrecognizable and dangerous. He brought his findings straight to the king. And then, the ultimate betrayal, the one Camilla never saw coming. One of her closest allies, someone deeply embedded in her inner operations, flipped. Whether out of guilt, fear, or the promise of royal protection, they crossed the line and delivered everything to Charles. Recordings, logs, names, money trails. It was the confirmation Charles needed. In secret, he commissioned a full internal investigation, bypassing the traditional palace apparatus. The probe had already been underway for weeks before the royal order was signed. Camilla had been operating in a web she thought she controlled, unaware that the strands were already being cut, one by one. But stripping Camilla of her power wasn't just about politics, it was also deeply personal for Charles. When Prince William allegedly confronted his father behind closed doors, he didn't mince words. He warned Charles that Camilla's influence was threatening the future of the monarchy. It was the moment Charles stopped defending his wife and started preparing to dismantle her power. But what else did William uncover? The encounter between father and son was not arranged on ceremony. It was raw, urgent, and charged with a tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. William had watched from the sidelines, his patience thinning as Camilla's role within the palace shifted from ceremonial presence to backroom operator. He had raised subtle objections before, careful not to challenge his father's personal choices. But now, with the monarchy's image slipping and internal trust fracturing, he no longer held back. What he revealed that day cut deeper than politics. It reached the heart of the institution itself. William had quietly held private briefings with royal security chiefs, asking hard questions about who had access to what and why. To his dismay, Camilla's name came up repeatedly in places it shouldn't have. She had been looped into confidential sessions concerning state affairs, international delegations, and private family financials. Some of those meetings had no official record. Some participants were unapproved. The prince found himself staring at an invisible empire his stepmother had built around herself, one Charles had either underestimated or willfully ignored. What disturbed William even more was how those circles began to exclude Catherine. The Princess of Wales had long played a dignified, graceful role in the public eye. But within the palace, her invitations began to disappear. Her appearances were limited. Events where she once stood at the forefront were now mysteriously realigned. When Catherine raised her concerns, William knew it wasn't paranoia. It was precision. Someone was deliberately reducing her visibility. And in the royal family, invisibility can be a death sentence. Behind closed doors, William made his position clear. He refused to publicly endorse Camilla's role in upcoming engagements. He pulled his support from joint projects. He distanced himself with deliberate silence. And in a moment that would later be leaked through a senior aide, he issued a devastating ultimatum. It's her or the crown. That phrase struck Charles not only as a challenge, but as prophecy. He knew his son was not bluffing. The future of the monarchy, his legacy, was at stake. Charles sat with those words for days. They echoed in every meeting, every document he signed, every hand he shook. He began to replay every warning he'd ignored, every hesitation he'd dismissed. Camilla's growing power was no longer a personal issue, it had become a constitutional crisis. His love, his guilt, his history with her, none of it could outweigh the obligation he bore to the crown. The choice was no longer about marriage. It was about survival. And while Charles weighed his next steps, Camilla made a last-ditch move that only sealed her fate. In a desperate attempt to preserve her authority, Camilla made one final move. She reached out to an old ally in Parliament, pushing for a symbolic public endorsement of her leadership in royal charities. But instead of support, she triggered a political storm and gave Charles exactly what he needed to strike. The pressure was closing in on all sides. Her influence had begun to erode, her allies silenced or removed, her decisions questioned, blocked, and retracted. But Camilla was not ready to accept defeat. In a last attempt to reassert her grip on the crown's inner workings, she contacted a long-standing political confidant and MP with deep ties to the royal household and a history of playing kingmaker behind closed doors. Her message was simple: secure a statement of parliamentary praise for her role in modernizing the monarchy's charitable operations. A gesture, yes, but one that would symbolically reaffirm her relevance. What she didn't anticipate was that the request, meant to remain private, would be leaked within hours. The letter, subtly worded, yet unmistakably loaded, was passed through political channels until it landed in the hands of an opposing MP who immediately went public. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Critics accused Camilla of attempting to manipulate government sentiment for personal gain, calling it an unconstitutional overreach that blurred the line between ceremonial presence and political power. Camilla, who had always insisted she never sought political influence, was now caught red-handed attempting to manufacture it. And worse, she had done it without the knowledge or consent of the king's office. Inside the palace, protocol advisors erupted in fury. The very foundation of royal neutrality had been shaken. Back-channel communications exploded, private emails, coded texts, urgent midnight phone calls. Palace aides scrambled to understand how such a miscalculation had occurred and why there had been no internal checks. The press office, blindsided, issued a vague statement claiming no knowledge of Camilla's correspondence. But the damage had already been done. In the court of royal protocol, intent mattered just as much as execution. Camilla had crossed a line. For Charles, it was the final blow. Whatever hesitation remained dissolved the moment he read the full contents of that letter. He saw not a queen consort acting out of love for the crown, but a woman maneuvering to safeguard her personal legacy, no matter the constitutional cost. Advisors later said the king didn't raise his voice, didn't pace the room. He simply turned to his legal team and asked a single question: how soon can it be done? Within 48 hours, the royal order stripping Camilla of all decision-making power had been drafted, reviewed, and signed. It was not a moment of triumph, it was a moment of grim necessity. Charles knew the storm that would follow. But he also knew that inaction would be far worse. The monarchy had survived betrayal, scandal, and silence, but never before had it stared down a conflict so internal, so personal, and so public. Camilla's final move, meant to fortify her position, had instead handed Charles every justification he needed. Her fate was no longer a matter of debate, it was a matter of decree. But signing the order was only the beginning, the consequences were far from over. Camilla woke up with titles, but no power. Her staff dismissed, her access revoked, and her voice silenced in all major royal decisions. Stripped of her grip on the institution, she now wanders the palace halls as a queen in name, only haunted by whispers, betrayed by those once loyal, and shunned by a crown she thought she had conquered. The aftermath of the royal order was not delivered with grand announcements or televised speeches. It came quietly, with surgical precision. Camilla's name disappeared from advisory council lists. Invitations she once received automatically were redirected. Meetings went on without her, decisions made in rooms where she once sat at the king's side. The ceremonial roles she had once cherished, laying wreaths, presenting honors, representing the monarchy abroad, were reassigned, not with malice but indifference. The institution no longer asked for her participation. It simply moved on without her. Even her living quarters became a symbol of the change. Residences once reserved for her private use were discreetly reallocated to other royals. One, reportedly offered to Princess Anne without so much as a word to Camilla. Her staff, those she had handpicked, trusted, and confided in, were absorbed into the larger royal household or let go altogether. There were no goodbyes, no explanations. What was once hers was now under someone else's control. The isolation grew deeper by the day. Aides whispered that even her calls were being monitored, logged under the justification of operational security. Conversations once held in private now echoed back to those she feared. The palace, once her domain, felt colder. Doors closed a little faster behind her. The silence, once a luxury, became suffocating. Camilla's public presence, once carefully curated and consistently applauded, began to unravel. Engagements were postponed or canceled outright. Those she did attend were marked by distance, no family members by her side, no senior royals in photographs. The subtle choreography of the monarchy now positioned her on the margins, no longer center stage. And the press, always opportunistic, sensed the change. The sympathetic tone that once framed her as a survivor of scrutiny now turned clinical, even hostile. Headlines questioned her relevance. Columns speculated on her legacy. The media storm she had once manipulated now circled her like vultures. And yet, through all this, Camilla remained. Present, but fading. Dignified, but diminished. She bore the humiliation not with defiance, but with quiet disbelief. The woman who had fought for decades to be accepted, to be seen, had finally risen to the top, only to find the crown slipping through her fingers the moment she reached for control. Now she watched the institution she had once shaped with whispers and alliances reshape itself to erase her mark. Her fall was not loud. It was slow. And that made it all the more painful. But even as Camilla fades into silence, the kingdom is asking what comes next for Charles. King Charles may have regained control of his monarchy, but at what cost? His decision shattered the palace's illusion of unity. Behind his public composure lies a man forced to choose between love and legacy, between silence and sovereignty. The crown is secure, but the heart of the king may never recover. In the days that followed the signing of the royal order, the public response was far from unified. While many applauded Charles for taking decisive action in the face of internal disruption, others, particularly longtime supporters of Camilla, lashed out. They viewed the move not as protection of the monarchy, but as a betrayal of a woman who had weathered decades of scrutiny by his side. Letters flooded the palace, editorials voiced outrage, and a subtle campaign emerged online demanding answers the palace refused to give. In trying to contain a crisis, Charles had ignited a new one he couldn't control with legal decrees or silent retreats. And then came the internal fractures. Reports began surfacing of a growing emotional distance between Charles and his siblings. Princess Anne, long known for her steeliness, was said to have expressed quiet disapproval of how quickly Camilla had been cast aside. Prince Edward reportedly kept his distance altogether, refusing to be drawn into either camp. Even within the staff, loyalties were tested. Some quietly resented the sudden shift in power, while others feared the precedent it set. The palace, though outwardly calm, was a house split by shadows. There was also a logistical dilemma: how to publicly present a queen consort who no longer wielded any real influence. For the first time in royal history, the title and the power behind it stood in direct contradiction. Should she continue to appear beside Charles at state events? Should her name be included in future programs? Every decision became a minefield, forcing the royal press team into a frantic balancing act, crafting appearances that looked cohesive, while hiding the truth that nothing was. In the vacuum left by Camilla's fall, Charles began leaning more heavily on William and Catherine. Their clean image, their measured presence, and their increasing popularity made them the natural pillars upon which the king could rest. But even that shift came with its own complexities. William's rising role meant the beginning of a quiet transfer of influence, one that would redefine the balance of power in the years to come. For Charles, every move forward seemed to come with a step away from what once was. The toll became visible. In recent solo appearances, Charles appeared distant, even hollow. The trademark confidence had given way to a heavy stillness. Some observers called it the weight of responsibility. Others whispered it was grief not just for the woman he had chosen, but for the dream he had built with her. A dream that now lay broken, too entangled in ambition to be salvaged. Behind the palace doors, those closest to him speak of a king who has grown quieter, more isolated. The man who once defied public outrage to stand by Camilla now eats in silence, works in silence, and carries a crown that may have never felt heavier. The monarchy has been preserved, but the man at its center remains haunted by the price of that preservation. Yet even now, whispers suggest this story isn't over. Camilla may be down, but she isn't gone. Insiders claim Camilla is already preparing her next move, from securing memoir rights to meeting with legal teams. Some say she holds secrets that could shake the monarchy to its core. Others believe she'll wait patiently, striking only when the crown least expects it. Is this the quiet before the storm, or the last chapter of a royal war? Though she's been cast out of the royal inner circle, Camilla is not retreating quietly. In the weeks following her public removal from power, she was spotted meeting with her personal legal counsel in discreet locations outside palace grounds. The meetings were off schedule, unchaperoned, and, according to one source, marked by a sense of quiet urgency. Something was being planned. Something the palace hadn't anticipated or perhaps feared all along. For every door that had been slammed in her face within the monarchy, another now seemed to open in the outside world, where leverage doesn't depend on bloodlines, but on truth, or at least the threat of it. Rumors have begun to swirl of a potential tell-all memoir, a book that could upend everything the royal family has worked to rebuild. Camilla, once the subject of scandal, now stands at the center of a story she alone can fully tell. Decades of private correspondence, confidential meetings, and off-the-record truths remain locked away in her memory, and possibly her personal archives. What she could reveal wouldn't just be damaging to Charles, it could ripple through the very fabric of the firm. Affairs, alliances, secrets long buried to protect the institution's image. If she speaks, the monarchy could be plunged into a chaos it may not recover from. Still, others believe Camilla won't go the route of immediate exposure, that she will instead retreat tactically, only to strike from a distance. There is speculation she may step back from public life, but not without securing influence behind the scenes. Her network, though publicly fractured, is not entirely dismantled. Former allies are slowly circling back, whispering support, and forming what one insider chillingly called a quiet resistance. It isn't organized, not yet. But the pieces are there. And those who once feared her now fear what she may become when she has nothing left to lose. Inside the palace, royal aides have begun monitoring her communications closely. Emails are tracked, visitor logs reviewed, trusted staff reassigned. They are not just containing scandal, they're preparing for war. Because if there's one thing they've learned, it's that Camilla never acted without purpose. Every move, every silence, every smile had calculation behind it. And now, With the crown having stripped her power, there's little holding her back from taking the one thing the monarchy cannot control: its story. She'll never go quietly, one insider warned, the words laced with more fear than resentment. They know this isn't over. It never truly was. Because Camilla doesn't vanish. She waits, she watches, and she strikes when the kingdom thinks it's safe again. The monarchy has endured many storms, but this one may leave scars that never truly fade. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.